Something is going seriously wrong for House Republicans, and Speaker Mike Johnson may be discovering that the biggest threat to his majority isn't coming from Democrats. It's coming from the man Republicans built their entire midterm strategy around, Donald Trump. Because with the 2026 midterms getting closer, Republicans are facing a political problem they cannot simply spin away. The House majority is already razor thin. Democrats are aggressively expanding their list of Republican-held districts they believe are vulnerable. And now Trump's own political operation is facing questions about where its enormous financial resources are actually going. That puts Mike Johnson in an almost impossible position. He has to defend Trump's agenda. He has to protect vulnerable Republican members. And at the same time, he has to convince voters that Republicans deserve another 2 years in power. But here's the problem. What if Trump himself is becoming the issue Republicans have to campaign against, and the answer could determine who controls the House after November? Today, we're breaking down the growing Republican midterm crisis, why Mike Johnson is under enormous pressure, why Trump's strategy is creating new headaches for vulnerable Republicans, and why Democrats think this could be their opening. Let's start with the most important fact. Mike Johnson doesn't have the luxury of a giant Republican majority. House Republicans are operating with an extremely narrow margin. That means just a handful of competitive districts could change the entire balance of power. And Democrats know it. They've been expanding their target list, including Republican-held districts that previously looked relatively safe. According to reporting from AP, Democrats recently added 12 more Republican-held districts to their midterm target list, bringing the total to 58 seats. That's significant. Because Democrats don't need to win everywhere, they don't need a political landslide, they simply need to flip enough seats to take the gavel away from Mike Johnson. And that is why every Republican district suddenly matters. Pause. One bad candidate, one unpopular issue, one scandal, one economic problem, one bad national headline. In a closely divided House, that can be enough. And Mike Johnson knows it. That's why Republicans have been spending the summer trying to sell their legislative record directly to voters. Johnson and his leadership team have been traveling across the country during the August recess, trying to strengthen vulnerable incumbents and promote the Republican agenda. But there's a problem. The national political environment may be working against them. Here's where Donald Trump enters the story. Midterm elections traditionally punish the party controlling the White House. Voters often use the election as a way to express approval or frustration with the president. And Republicans currently have something else to worry about: Trump's approval numbers. Recent reporting has described significant headwinds for Republicans, including dissatisfaction over inflation, the economy, and other major policy issues. That creates a dangerous political equation for House Republicans, because if voters think, "I don't like what is happening under this administration," they don't have to wait for a presidential election to respond. They can respond in November, and that's exactly what Democrats want. They want every Republican candidate to answer one question: are you standing with Trump? Because if Republicans say yes, Democrats can nationalize the race. If Republicans say no, they risk angering Trump's base. And Mike Johnson is stuck right in the middle. Mike Johnson has spent much of his speakership trying to keep an extremely difficult coalition together. On one side are Republicans who want Trump's agenda passed immediately. On the other are Republicans who worry about elections, spending, fiscal policy, vulnerable districts, and what voters back home actually want. And Johnson has to keep all of them moving in the same direction. That's easier said than done. Just look at the legislative battles surrounding the Republican reconciliation strategy. Johnson has faced pressure from Trump, while also dealing with disagreements inside his own conference. The issue isn't simply whether Republicans support Trump. Most Republican members understand the political importance of remaining aligned with the president. The real question is, which Trump priorities help them win their districts and which ones could hurt them? That's a completely different question. And it becomes especially important when you have members representing districts that Trump won comfortably, but where local voters may care much more about prices, healthcare, jobs, and government services. That tension is now becoming impossible to ignore. One of the clearest examples is the fight over the Save America Act. Trump has repeatedly pushed Republicans to advance election-related legislation centered on citizenship documentation and voter identification. Mike Johnson has made the legislation a major Republican priority as well. In July, Johnson said House Republicans intended to keep pushing the measure, framing it as a central part of their election integrity agenda. But here's the political problem. The legislation has faced major obstacles in the Senate, and Republicans themselves are not necessarily united on how much emphasis should be placed on it heading into the midterms. Recent reporting says some Republican senators have expressed concern that Trump's continued focus on the issue could distract from issues voters care more about. And that brings us to the central strategic question. What do Republican voters actually want their candidates talking about? Because Trump's political instincts are often built around confrontation, but congressional candidates have a different problem. They have to win specific districts, and now Trump's own political team appears to recognize the problem. According to Axios, Trump's advisors recently urged Senate Republicans to put more emphasis on healthcare as they prepare for the midterms. Why? Because internal polling reportedly showed Republicans had a much stronger messaging advantage on certain healthcare issues than on the SAVE Act. Think about what that means. The Republican strategy is potentially shifting from talk about election integrity to talk about healthcare and affordability. That's not a minor adjustment. That's a campaign strategy question. Because healthcare is personal. People don't experience politics as a cable news argument. They experience it when they open a medical bill, when insurance premiums rise, when prescription costs increase, when a family member needs treatment, and that creates a huge challenge for Republicans. They need to convince voters that their policies will improve everyday life, not simply that Democrats are worse. And that may be one of the biggest battles of the entire midterm campaign. Then there's another problem: money. Trump's political operation reportedly has enormous financial resources available, but questions have been raised about how much of that money is actually being deployed to help Republican candidates. A recent report cited data showing MAGA Incorporated had approximately $401 million in cash, while spending only about $2.3 million on Republican candidates at that point in the cycle. Now, this doesn't automatically mean Trump isn't going to spend heavily later. Campaign spending can accelerate dramatically as Election Day approaches, but for vulnerable Republicans, timing matters. Because candidates don't just need money eventually. They need money when voters are making up their minds. They need television ads, they need field operations, they need digital campaigns, they need voter outreach, and they need to define their opponents before their opponents define them. So when Republicans are looking at dozens of competitive districts, every dollar matters. And that is why questions surrounding Trump's enormous political war chest are becoming increasingly important. But money isn't the only problem. Candidates matter. And Republicans have already seen warning signs. Take North Carolina. Republican Representative Chuck Edwards abruptly announced that he would not seek re-election. Axios reported that his departure created another headache for Republicans in a district that could now require a serious effort to hold. That's exactly the kind of development Mike Johnson doesn't want, because every unexpected open seat creates uncertainty. And uncertainty creates spending, and spending creates pressure somewhere else. Meanwhile, Democrats are looking at districts that Republicans may have considered safe only months ago. Their strategy is simple: make Republicans defend everything. If Republicans have to spend money defending 20, 30, 40 or more seats, Democrats don't necessarily need to dominate the entire map. They just need enough opportunities to break the majority. And now we reach the biggest question. Is Donald Trump an asset for Republican candidates or a liability? The answer may depend entirely on the district. In heavily Republican areas, Trump's endorsement can still be enormously valuable. His base remains a powerful force inside the Republican Party, but competitive districts are different. Those candidates have to appeal beyond the most committed MAGA voters. They need independents. They need moderates. They need voters who may have supported Trump but aren't satisfied with the direction of the country. And that's where Trump's approval numbers become so important. Recent polling and analysis have shown Republicans facing a difficult national environment, although the House outcome remains far from predetermined. That's an important distinction. Democrats may have momentum, but momentum isn't the same thing as victory. Republicans still have paths to hold the House, and that means Mike Johnson's job isn't impossible. It's just incredibly difficult. Democrats appear to understand the assignment. They don't necessarily have to make this election about every Democratic policy. They can make it about Republican control. They can ask voters, are you better off than you were before? and then connect every local Republican candidate to the national administration. That's a classic midterm strategy. Nationalize the election, make the president the central character, and force every incumbent to defend the record. If that works, Mike Johnson could wake up after Election Day with a very different House. But Republicans have their own strategy. They are trying to sell their legislative accomplishments. They are emphasizing taxes, national security, immigration, energy, and election policy. Johnson and other GOP leaders are also spending the August recess campaigning aggressively in vulnerable areas. So this isn't over, not even close. Here's what makes the next few months so important. The 2026 midterms aren't simply about whether Democrats can win, they're about whether Republicans can separate their congressional candidates from the political turbulence surrounding Trump, without alienating the voters who put those Republicans in office. Mike Johnson has to walk that line. Trump has to decide where and when to spend his political capital. Republican candidates have to figure out which issues actually move voters. And Democrats have to prove that their current momentum can translate into actual victories district by district. That's why the coming months could become a political stress test for the entire Republican Party. Because if Republicans lose only a handful of seats, Mike Johnson could lose his speakership. If Democrats overperform, the House could change hands. And if Republicans hold the line, the entire narrative about Trump's midterm weakness could change overnight. So is Mike Johnson really in utter terror? That's the dramatic question. But the political reality is more complicated. There is no guaranteed Republican collapse. There is no guaranteed Democratic takeover. What we have right now is something potentially more interesting. A highly competitive election where the president's political strength could determine the fate of Congress. Trump may believe his movement is stronger than ever. Democrats believe voters are ready to punish Republicans. And Mike Johnson is standing directly between those two forces. The question isn't whether Trump can dominate a Republican rally. He clearly can. The question is whether that political power can translate into enough competitive congressional victories to save the House majority. Because in November, Mike Johnson doesn't need Trump to win a rally. He needs Republicans to win districts, and those are two very different things. The midterms are coming, and for the Republican Party, the margin for error may be getting smaller by the day. What do you think? Can Mike Johnson hold the House, or are Republicans heading into a midterm reckoning? Let us know in the comments. And if you want the latest breakdown of the 2026 political battle, subscribe and stay with us. Research note: the script uses current August 2026 reporting and public information as context, while the narration and wording are original. The linked YouTube videos page was also checked, but its accessible page did not provide a transcript, so this script does not reproduce or paraphrase an unavailable transcript.